Verstappen did not file an official protest because Russell was fast. He filed it because the data looked too dangerous to ignore. Too clean under braking. Too strong on traction. Too stable through the stint. Too kind on the tires. Too repeatable when Red Bull expected the Mercedes to fade. And in Formula 1, repeatable speed is not just performance. It is a warning. Because one fast lap can be luck. One perfect setup can be explained. But when a rival suddenly gains without paying the usual price, Red Bull has to ask the question that can shake an entire paddock. Is Russell's Mercedes legal brilliance, or did the FIA find something hiding inside the data? And here is the terrifying part. If the data proves something illegal, Mercedes faces a scandal. But if the data is alarming and still legal, Verstappen may have an even bigger problem. Because then Russell's pace was not a trick. It was real, repeatable, and possibly the first sign that Mercedes has unlocked an advantage Red Bull still does not know how to beat. Subscribe to the channel. At first, Red Bull had a safe explanation. Mercedes had simply found the right window. Russell had driven a clean race. The tires had worked. The setup had landed. The track had given the car exactly what it needed. That is the comfortable version. That is the version a team tells itself when a rival suddenly looks stronger than expected, because it keeps the threat small. A perfect setup can disappear at the next circuit. A tire advantage can vanish when the temperature changes. A track that helps Mercedes one weekend can expose them the next. But Verstappen did not react like a driver who had only seen a normal strong weekend. He reacted like a driver who had seen a pattern. And patterns are what scare Formula 1 teams. Because one fast lap can be explained. One clean sector can be ignored. One strong race phase can be called timing. But when the same strength keeps appearing, under braking, on traction, through the tires, and across the stint, the story changes. It stops looking like luck. It starts looking like a system. That is why Russell's Mercedes became so uncomfortable for Red Bull. It was not just fast. It looked calm. And calm speed is dangerous. A car that is fast but nervous can be pressured. A car that is fast but hard on tires can be weighted out. A car that is fast in clean air but weak in traffic can be forced into trouble. But a car that is calm under braking, clean on corner exit, gentle on its tires, and repeatable through the race gives rivals fewer places to attack. That is when Red Bull starts asking harder questions. Where is the time coming from? Why is the car not sliding more? Why are the tires not fading sooner? Why does Russell look able to repeat the lap without fighting the car? Why is the Mercedes gaining without paying the price Red Bull expected? Those questions matter because Formula 1 performance is usually a trade-off. More corner grip can mean more drag. More straight-line speed can mean less stability. More aggressive pace can mean more tire degradation. More defense can mean more energy spent. So when a car appears to gain in several areas at once, every rival wants the same answer. What is the cost? If Red Bull cannot see the cost, suspicion begins. Not proof. Suspicion. And in Formula 1, suspicion is enough to change the atmosphere. The garage becomes quieter. The engineers look again. The driver asks sharper questions. The team principal chooses words more carefully. The governing body becomes part of the conversation. That is the real meaning of an official protest in a story like this. It is not just anger. It is a demand for certainty. Because Verstappen can accept being beaten by speed he understands. He may not like it, but he can fight it. Red Bull can build around it. They can adjust setup. They can change strategy. They can bring upgrades. They can tell the driver where the rival is vulnerable. But unexplained speed is different. Unexplained speed creates doubt. And doubt is one of the most dangerous things a championship team can feel. It makes every decision heavier. Do they chase tire life? Do they study Mercedes braking stability? Do they look at energy deployment? Do they pressure the Fédération Internationale de l'Automobile for clarification? Do they rush their own development? Do they trust their path, or start reacting to Mercedes? Every answer costs time. And time is the one thing Red Bull cannot afford to waste. That is why the data matters more than the result. The result tells the public that Russell was quick. The data tells Red Bull why. Throttle traces, brake traces, energy use, tire temperatures, minimum corner speeds, straight line comparison. How early Russell could get on the power. How much steering correction he needed. How the car behaved when the tires were no longer fresh. How much pace stayed alive when Red Bull expected it to fall away. That is the hidden race. The race the fans do not see directly, but the teams study obsessively. And if those traces showed a Mercedes that was too clean in too many places, Verstappen was never going to let it slide. Because he knows how championships shift. They do not always shift with one huge crash, one dramatic penalty, or one obvious illegal part. Sometimes they shift with one team finding a performance window before the others understand it. A little more tire life. A little cleaner traction. A little better energy use. A little more stability under braking. A little more confidence for the driver. Each gain seems small. Together, they become a race-winning package. That is the version Red Bull fears. Not a Mercedes with one trick. A Mercedes with a chain. Better braking stability protects the front tires. A calmer rear lets Russell open the throttle earlier. Earlier throttle improves corner exit. Cleaner exits reduce sliding. Less sliding keeps the tires cooler. Cooler tires preserve pace. Preserved pace gives Mercedes strategy freedom. Strategy freedom creates control. And control is what Red Bull wants for itself. That is why Russell's pace felt like a threat. Because it may have shown Mercedes finding the kind of connected performance that Red Bull has used against the grid for years. And when another team begins to show that same connection, Red Bull notices immediately. They know what it can become. A strong weekend becomes confidence. Confidence becomes development direction. Development direction becomes better upgrades. Better upgrades become repeatable pace. Repeatable pace becomes championship pressure. That is the danger Verstappen was trying to stop early. Because if Red Bull waits until Mercedes repeats it 3 more times, the damage is already done. The points are gone. The momentum has shifted. The paddock has adjusted. The rival has belief. That is why an official protest is not just about the past. It is about the future. It says, we need to know what this is before it becomes normal. Because once a rival advantage becomes normal, it no longer feels suspicious. It becomes accepted. And once it is accepted, everyone else is already behind. That is where the Fédération Internationale de l'Automobile enters the story. The governing body does not investigate feelings. It investigates legality. It checks whether the car fits the rulebook. It looks at measurements, systems, components, and compliance. It decides whether a team crossed the line, or simply walked closer to the line than everyone else dared. And that distinction is brutal. If Mercedes crossed the line, Red Bull has a clear path. The advantage can be challenged. The governing body can act. The result can be questioned. The scandal can explode. But if Mercedes did not cross the line, then Red Bull faces something much harder. A legal advantage. And legal advantages do not disappear because rivals complain. They have to be beaten. That is the coldest part of this whole story. The most frightening outcome for Verstappen may not be the governing body finding something illegal. It may be the governing body finding nothing illegal at all. Because then Russell's pace stays real. The data stays alarming. The Mercedes stays dangerous. And Red Bull is left with one brutal assignment. Understand it, or lose to it. That is why the word alarming matters. Alarming does not have to mean proven illegal. Alarming means the data raised questions that Red Bull could not ignore. A speed profile that did not match expectation. Tire behavior that looked too strong. Braking stability that seemed too clean. Traction that made the car look unusually easy to drive. Energy use that helped Russell stay protected when Red Bull expected vulnerability. Those details might all be legal. But if they are legal, they are even more important. Because then they point to performance Mercedes can keep. And if Mercedes can keep it, Red Bull must respond on the car, not just in the hearing room. That response is risky. If Red Bull chases the wrong explanation, it wastes development time. If it assumes the advantage was track-specific and it was not, Mercedes gains momentum. If Red Bull rushes upgrades to answer a threat it has not fully understood, it can create new problems in its own car. That is how a rival's pace can hurt you twice. First on the stopwatch. Then in your decision-making. This is why Russell's Mercedes may have become such a serious issue. Not because Red Bull cannot handle a fast rival. They can. Not because Verstappen cannot fight Russell. He can. But because a rival with unexplained repeatable pace forces everyone to react. And reaction is not control. Red Bull wants control. Verstappen wants to know where the fight is. He wants to know whether he is attacking tires, straight-line speed, braking stability, or strategy. But if the Mercedes gain is hidden inside several connected areas, Red Bull cannot attack one simple weakness. They have to solve the whole puzzle. That puzzle is the real threat. Was the Mercedes kinder to its tires because the aerodynamic balance was stronger? Was the traction cleaner because the rear platform was more stable? Was the pace repeatable because Russell did not have to correct the car as much? Was the energy deployment helping him defend in exactly the right places? Was the car producing grip without paying the expected drag penalty? Those are the questions that define the next phase of the fight. Because a car with no obvious weakness changes how rivals race. If Russell's tires stay alive, Verstappen cannot simply wait for degradation. If the Mercedes exits corners cleanly, Red Bull cannot count on traction weakness. If the car stays calm under braking, pressure becomes harder to apply. If the energy deployment is strong, overtaking becomes more difficult. And if all of that is legal, then the protest does not remove the problem. It reveals the scale of it. That is the twist. An official protest can expose a rival. But it can also expose fear. It tells the paddock that Red Bull saw something it did not like. It tells Mercedes that its pace hurt Red Bull enough to demand answers. It tells the fans that the fight has moved beyond the track. And it tells the governing body that the line between innovation and controversy is now under a microscope. That line is where Formula One lives. Every team wants to stand on it. Not too far behind, because then the car is slow. Not over it, because then the car is illegal. Right on it. Close enough to gain performance. Safe enough to pass inspection. That is where the smartest teams win. And if Mercedes has found a way to stand on that line with Russell's car, then Red Bull's problem is bigger than one race. It becomes a development war. Because the next question is not only, was the car legal in Austria? The next question is, can Mercedes repeat it? That is the question that will decide whether this story fades or explodes. If Russell falls back at the next race, Austria looks like a perfect weekend. Still impressive, but manageable. If Russell is strong again, the suspicion becomes louder. If the tires look calm again, Red Bull studies harder. If the braking looks stable again, the questions multiply. If the pace repeats again, then the word suspicious begins to change. It becomes serious. And after that, every Mercedes run becomes evidence. That is the power of a first warning. At the time, it looks like one race. Later, it may look like the moment everything began. That is why Verstappen could not ignore it. He knows Formula One moves fast. He knows rivals do not wait. He knows Mercedes will not explain its advantage for Red Bull's benefit. He knows the governing body can only police the rules, not protect Red Bull from legal innovation. So he demands clarity. Not because clarity guarantees victory, but because without clarity, Red Bull is fighting in the dark. And no champion wants that. This first block is really about the fear of the unknown. Russell's pace may have been legal. It may have been track-specific. It may have been setup. It may have been driver execution. It may have been a clever Mercedes breakthrough. Or, if proven by the governing body, it could have been something outside the rules. But until the answer is clear, the threat grows. Because the unknown is where teams lose confidence. And once confidence cracks, everything becomes harder. The driver pushes more. The strategy becomes less patient. The setup choices become more aggressive. The development path becomes less certain. That is how one alarming data trace can become a championship problem. Not instantly. Quietly. Decision by decision. Race by race. And that is why Verstappen's protest matters. It is not just about Russell's Mercedes. It is about Red Bull refusing to let an unexplained advantage become accepted before the truth is forced into the open. Because if the data proves illegal performance, Mercedes has a scandal. But if the data proves legal performance, Red Bull has something even more dangerous. A rival that has found speed inside the rules, and a championship fight that just became much harder to control.